Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. I have a very, very special guest today. I have Harvard Professor Emeritus Dr. Richard Kradin on his new book, A Godless Crusade, the Progressive Campaign to Rid the World of Religion. It seems like the left has been doing a pretty decent job of it. They have been succeeding. So I'd like to welcome you to the program. How are you today, Dr. Kradin?
I'm well, and thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad you could be here. I think that your book is important at this moment in time. We've seen the American and the whole Western civilization constantly be denigrated. The idea of Judeo-Christian roots has been torn from our society. And we've seen this idea of what you label secular humanism. So in your book, you trace today's cultural war back to the rise of this idea of secular humanism. Can you explain to the audience how the shift laid the groundwork for everything that we're witnessing today?
I think the shift began to occur probably back in the 1600s with what we call the Age of Reason and the emergence of science, and really got into full swing with the Enlightenment in the 18th century, where there was a concerted effort to minimize the role of religion, particularly in politics and in the social frame as well. And that has continued on for the last 200 years or so, but it's really sped up recently with the emergence of progressivism in its most recent kind of neo-Marxist avatar as Wokism. The Enlightenment thinkers had issues with organized religion, but they more or less shared the same Judeo-Christian values that we normally think of. But those have really been undermined, and undermined in a concerted way by the progressive movement, and that's what we're looking at today. And it's not by chance, without sounding like a conspiracist, the tenets of what's taking place today were really set out in documentary form back in the 1950s as part of the movement of communism to try to undermine the capitalist system. So much of what we're seeing today really is the continuation of a movement that began in earnest probably in the 1960s and has continued on now for the last 60 years and has progressively became more evident, I think, to all of us.
When we look at the whole entire Marxist movement, they have to do away with religion, right? Because there could be no higher authority than the state apparatus. And so the state must be the most powerful entity. If there's a higher power, if there's an afterlife, if there's religion, well, then obviously the state is going to come after that. This organized effort, you talk about it as the idea of wokeism, is its own type of religion. That's, the loyalists that follow it and the activists that we see all over the place. How does it mimic the structure of traditional religions while at the same time it's working to replace and silence religion?
Well, it's interesting because it really has hijacked some of the elements of the Judeo-Christian ethic. So wokeism, insists on the minimization of any type of inequality, particularly focuses on those groups within society who they see as being at some type of disadvantage, which is part of what one sees also in the Judeo-Christian tradition. But not in the lawless manner, if you will, that wokeism has entertained. So it is in many respects a religion, as Marxism is a religion as well. It's a political religion, it's an atheistic religion, Wokeism never declares itself as clearly atheistic, but it clearly it is. But it appeals to elements, particularly in Christianity, and people of the Christian faith who are traditionalists sometimes look at the elements in wokeism and say, well, it just sounds similar in a way to what we practice in Christianity, but it's to an extreme, and obviously at some level it's meant to undermine traditional religious faith.
Listen, I'm a Roman Catholic, and the teachings of Jesus was always that you have to do these things as an individual, right? That you help those that are less fortunate as an individual, that we have free will and we make choices. But what wokeism does, it makes it compulsory, right? It forces government. Government has to be the vehicle to make sure that you do good out there, that to stop hunger, to help the poor, even though it doesn't really fill that void. It doesn't do those things, does it?
Right. Well, there would be no way to actually compel people to do these things. The traditional religion calls upon people to do them, and if they do so, that's great. And if they don't, well, they have to face whatever crime and punishment elements there are for them within their faith. But no, wokeism insists that the state do it because otherwise it won't get done. And again, what's particularly disturbing about the woke progressive religion is the emphasis that they place on undermining the rule of law, which has always been part of traditional religion to greater or lesser extent, depending on the denomination. But when you undermine the enforcement of law, then it becomes problematic as to how you get to the goals that you're seeking.
Well, and we need to take a quick commercial break, but when we get back, your book highlights something that's really critical for people to understand. So everyone out, hang tight, we'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits, and Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So, Dr. Kradin, in your book, I think it's so important because you talk about how progressive elites have captured nearly every single American institution, every major institution, and I see it all the time. Which strategies allowed them to do it so effectively, and where has been the organizations to push back against what's going on?
Well, again, I think starting back in the 1960s, after the strife within society related to the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement, it became evident to certain people on the left that they wouldn't succeed by calling for revolution out on the streets, and there was no audience really for an economic sort of revolution, and that they would have to transform society in a Marxist direction by infiltrating the institutions. And they targeted particularly the educational institutions, higher education, and from there, they kind of spread out into all of the elite institutions. So virtually everyone who was educated in this country after 1960 was educated in a progressive mode. Now, progressivism has been present in society since the early 20th century, but it really moved on in a neo-Marxist fashion, if you will, starting in the 1960s. And so they've been very successful, as you've mentioned, in infiltrating virtually all of the major institutions, particularly those that are based or instilled with the idea of disseminating propaganda into the society. And so by capturing the news media, capturing the educational system, they've more or less limited what most people have access to in terms of information, and they can easily mold the thinking in the society. And that's what they've been successful in doing.
Yeah, especially when you dumb down the student body and you don't really teach students how to think critically anymore. It's more about teaching them what to think instead of how to think. And we've seen this go on for years. But one of the big surprises to me happened during the coronavirus. Now, as a college professor, I've been in the classroom nearly 20 years, and I've seen the fall off of student capabilities. Their writing capabilities declined dramatically even prior to COVID. Their social abilities declined dramatically even prior to COVID. But when COVID came, one of the things that shocked me was how willing churches throughout the country and houses of worship were to close their doors and listen to everything the government was telling them, instead of saying, no, we have freedom of religion. Religion is important. It goes well beyond a pandemic. How much damage did the religious institutions do to themselves with COVID, but also with other scandals? Obviously, the Catholic Church, and you had the pedophile scandals that went on and priests being pushed around. So how prominent of a role did religion play in their own demise to a certain degree?
I think it's played an important role. Again, I think all of the major institutional religions have suffered at some level with respect to attendance in their churches as a result of the secularism that's been emergent over the last century or so. And I think in a somewhat desperate attempt to bring people into the churches and fill their pews again, they felt it was necessary to begin to entertain some of the ideas that were coming out of the progressive left. To the extent that, again, it's very hard in some churches, the mainstream Protestant churches, the Reform, Judaism, many parishes in the Roman Catholic Church as well. It's very hard to distinguish what they're offering now from what progressivism claims to be, and they've undermined their own dogma and their own theological tenets as a result. So it's hard to know what exactly they stand for with respect to the traditional mode of what religion was meant to offer as a faith. So one is really hard-pressed to distinguish them from what you hear in any other progressive institution.
And in your book, A Godless Crusade, everyone needs to check it out. You write how religion has provided a moral framework that guides law. It guides culture, community, families. So what happens to a society when that framework begins to get stripped away and it's replaced by subjective and shifting standards of morality where, you can't make any judgments, everything's supposed to be tolerated, everything's supposed to be accepted, including men competing in women's sports? What happens to a society once that begins?
It collapses. And I think we're on the verge of that type of collapse. And certainly I think had there been another Democratic administration, we probably would have seen it occur. It collapses because you can't have fragmentation of society. I mean, as Madison talked about in the Federalist Papers, you can't have substantial factionalism within a society and expect it to exist. And you certainly can't have a society that's based on law that doesn't enforce its laws. And you can't have a society that has moral direction if there is just subjective morality that varies from individual to individual. So all of these things, when you impose them on the society, almost by necessity, have to lead to its collapse. And I think that's where we're going.
Well, and it's not just America, let's be honest. It's the entire Western world. It's Western civilization that it's death by a thousand cuts. I mean, you have people in these countries throughout Europe and here in the United States that now despise the countries that they were born in, lived in for years. They despise its culture, its customs. We saw it here in the United States where you have students 30% of the student body actually believes that Osama bin Laden was a force for good. That's how bad our education system is. Why does that happen? Does a nation advance so much and then it gets to a certain point where it hits a wall? I mean, why do people that have lived a life, if you live in the United States, you hit the lottery by being here.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet you have so many Americans that just have disdain for the country.
Well, some of them feel that they can comfortably have disdain for the country because I just don't think they recognize what the consequences of their disdain ultimately is going to be.
Not to interrupt you, but that's why prior to getting a high school degree, we should send every single student to some of the most miserable countries we could find. Keep them safe, but send them to these terrible countries where maybe they'll have a new appreciation for America when they get back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is true for a lot of people in the conservative movement. A lot of conservatives that I've met and that you see in the media as well, somehow have come from working class backgrounds or have working class in their background. And so I think they're more attuned to some of the hardships that one can confront in society, whereas some of the elites today have never suffered any hardship whatsoever and don't really feel that they could bear with it. So it's kind of easy for them to sit by and complain because they just have a good life and don't appreciate it. But there's a form of psychological masochism, if you will, in this attitude as well. It's very hard to understand how a white individual, for instance, can complain about white privilege and hate themselves without thinking that there's some form of underlying psychopathology there. Now, part of it's been indoctrinated into them, but they're receptive to it in some way. But again, it's not something that can sustain a society. And the greatness and the exceptionalism of America is going to be lost, if it hasn't already been lost, as a result of these individuals who just can't appreciate that they have it good.
Yeah, and America is the most exceptional nation. I mean, when we think about it, 250 years where all these different peoples from all these different places and we coexist well together. You don't find that anywhere else. You go to countries where they have 2,000 years of recorded history. They have shared customs, shared cultures, shared traditions, and they're linked together as a society, whereas America, the only thing that really links us is the tenets of the American creed, the idea of the American identity, the concepts of liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of religion and the press. And I think you're right. People just take advantage. So, Dr. Kradin, you brought up the Federalist Papers before. Is wokeism based on the idea of tribalism, to create that tribal society? And in the United States, where you have so many different people from so many different places, when it devolves into tribalism, has any country ever succeeded?
No, but I think that is ultimately the point of wokeism. I think the point of wokeism is to undermine the American system. And if you wanted to come up with a strategy to do that, what could be better than having the combination of diversity, pluralism, moral relativism? If you have individuals and tribal groups all sharing diverse and dissimilar ideas, how do you imagine that you're going to be able to maintain any fabric within society that's going to be functional? So the point of wokeism, I think, is to undermine American society. It's by no means benign. It needs to be looked at some level as a force for evil in the society for those of us who still think in terms of good and bad in that regard. I mean, it sounds kind of primitive, but I think you have to take that approach to it if you're going to succeed in countering it.
But I have to ask you, to what end? Like, what do they want to govern over? I mean, if the United States is torn down, if we do become a tribal society, what do they want to govern over? Collapse, death, violence, destruction?
Yeah, well, I don't think they've thought that one through. And you see that in virtually all of socialist communist societies. They're very good at tearing things down, but then once they've done that, they have nothing to offer in terms of rebuilding it. But again, it speaks to a kind of masochistic and nihilistic and destructive force within the psyche of these individuals, that they would consider this to be a viable approach. Because it isn't, as you say. It's ultimately just destructive with no evidence that there's something better on the other side of it.
Absolutely. And in your book, you argue that the progressive worldview and the Judeo-Christian ethic really can't coexist together. They can't be reconciled. So what does that mean for America's future? I mean, listen, I know the left wants to deny it, but we are a country that was founded on Judeo-Christian philosophies. We are a country that has built a society around that. Where are we headed here in the United States? And is there a way back to, I guess, normalcy, I'll call it?
If there is, I don't see it very clearly anymore. I think it's almost impossible for the polarized elements in this society to coexist. They certainly really can't communicate with each other because there's no mode of communication that would be based on reason. That seems to be absent. So I don't know where we stand. A civil war, an external war. External wars sometimes unite people in countries. That seems to be the case.
Happened during the Spanish-American War, following the Civil War. That brought us back together as a country.
Yeah, well, every war seems to do that. And probably more so when there was still a draft and people had to have some skin in the game, which we don't really anymore, which makes it easy to sit on the side and criticize what's going on without feeling that your relatives are going off to war. But short of that, I really don't see it. It's like a very bad marriage, if you will, that, requires a divorce, and sometimes even divorce isn't enough. One has to go to court and actually try to destroy the other individual so that they can't undermine you anymore. And that, I think may be the case here. I mean, it sounds awful.
Aren't you a ball of sunshine today?
Yeah. Well, but, I'm asked this question periodically, and I've thought about it a great deal, but I think it's naive. It's naive to think that you can sit down with the other side at this point and work it out. I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, and I want to explore that when we come back from a quick break. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits. And Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. We're talking to Dr. Richard Kradin, author of A Godless Crusade, the Progressive Campaign to Rid the World of Religion. And I think that this is an extremely important book. Now, Dr. Kradin, as both a psychoanalyst and also a cultural observer, how do you see the removal of God and faith affecting individuals on a psychological level, especially the younger generations that have been raised by screens, that have been raised in a post-religion culture, that are now being raised in a world of AI where they don't have to think anymore. They just plug something in and they get responses. They don't have to write papers. They don't have to read. How do you think this is going to affect them?
I think the evidence is already in on this. The average attention span in this country is about 10 seconds. The anxiety levels reported by teenagers are substantial. The suicide rate, the depression rate is way up. And it does seem to correlate with screens, but I think it also correlates with the absence of a moral, Judeo-Christian ethic or some form of ethic that everyone can cohere to, so that they can try to make some mode of meaning out of their existence. I think you have a lot of young people today who may have interest, but they have very little concept of there being a meaning in their life, because there is very little out there on which they can produce a cohesive set of values that would promote the idea of meaning.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. So there was a study, it was done in the United Kingdom, but I do believe it's reflective here. And I think if they ever did a study here, we'd probably see the same numbers, where about 70 to 75% of young people from age 16 to 29 feel that they don't have any sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. How dangerous is it when that many people within a population, particularly young people who are in the prime of their lives, feel they don't have a sense of purpose within society?
Well, I think you can guess the answer. It's very clear, I mean, and everything that we're talking about, I mean, it does sound very negative, but that's because it is. There is so much going on that is not helping the cohesion of this society or the sense of individual purpose, that it's very difficult to imagine how a society like this continues to function in a coherent manner.
Yeah, and obviously you turn away from God. I do see why some of that sense of purpose begins to evaporate, because you don't have a life of faith, and therefore do you have any obligations to family, to community without that faith part of it? When we look at it, I think that we have to explore something that is maybe a bright spot, maybe a little bit optimistic. We are seeing a younger generation that is trending to be more conservative than their cohorts from previous generations. We saw it in this last election that a lot of young people are beginning to identify as conservative. If they know what conservative means, I will put that as a caveat, because I'm not sure they really know what conservative means. But we're also starting to see some growth in places like the Catholic Church. Their attendance is up. They're starting to see an increased number of converts, and the converts are younger people. They're not people in their 60s, 70s, maybe towards the end scale of life. So do you think that some may be starting to wake up, that there are people that are gravitating towards faith because they see the debauchery of today's society, they see what's going on?
I can't really say that I know the answer to that. My own experience with my interactions with young people has not been particularly positive in that regard. I know that there was a conservative vote, or a vote for a conservative candidate in the last election, but I'm not sure how much of that was driven, one, by the economic situation in the country, and two, by the hopeless nature of the candidate on the Democratic presidential ballot. So I think people are maybe not that dim-witted to think that someone like Kamala Harris can run a country of the complexity of the United States. But in terms of the moral values within the country, I'm sure there are people who are coming around, but I'm not sure it's the majority, and that's my greatest concern. My greatest concern is that we can fix lots of things. We can win elections here and there, but unless we address what's going on in the upcoming generation, I think we're in very big trouble. And again, it may be turning the corner, but I'm not yet convinced that's the case.
Yeah, and I always argue that when it becomes, everyone looks to government and politics to solve the problem, but when the problem is the culture itself, it's much more difficult to solve. People who feel alienated by the Godless Crusade, what can they do practically and intellectually to defend their faith, their freedom, their traditions, their values, without being silenced or ostracized?
Well, I think they have to be a bit more courageous than they have been overall, and that's asking a lot for people, because not a lot of people are very brave, in my experience. I think if you have values, you have to be clear about what they are, and you have to stand for them, and you have to transmit them. And you have to be strong enough to resist what's around you in the culture, and not necessarily just embrace something because the fellow next to you seems to embrace it, or because the TV is telling you that you should. There's a lot of things where conservatives have, over the course of the last 50 years, become much more liberal in their cultural views about. And I'm not sure that I completely understand the reason for that, except that it's easier to go along than not. And that includes sexual orientation in the country. It includes this nonsense about LGBTQ. These are things that people are uncomfortable standing up and saying, gee, I just don't agree that this is a good thing for society or a good thing for my family, and they need to be able to do that, even if these things have moved in a way that they're now more or less accepted, because it's a slippery slope in the culture, and the more you embrace, the more the left seems to demand that you not only embrace but applaud and transmit.
Yeah, and it seems that the further left they go, they take the middle with it. That also moves further to the left as well. Dr. Kradin, I really enjoyed the conversation. Everyone needs to check out A Godless Crusade, the progressive campaign to rid the world of religion. I'll have links up at the PAS Report website, PASreport.com. Happy to have you back, Dr. Kradin. Great discussion.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at PAS Report.